Hello, everyone, and Happy New Year. Thank you for joining us here at Page Turners Plus. Today, for our first reflection of 2024, we'll be reflecting on Karen Lord's The Blue, Beautiful World. To tell you a bit more about this novel and the author, we have Paula.
Thank you, Roll J. Karen Lord is a Barbadian author of several novels, among them her most celebrated work, Redemption in Indigo. The Blue Beautiful World is her third science fiction novel. Set in the 22nd century, the novel's main concern is a scramble by alien civilizations to colonize planet Earth. The would be colonizers have infiltrated key institutions of power and live undetected among the original inhabitants of the planet. Unaware of the threat to their communities, human beings are ill equipped to defend their autonomy. Peace loving beings from other planets, mostly drawn from descendants of planet Earth's diaspora, must intervene to preserve the balance of power in the universe, including the independence of planet Earth from alien domination.
All right, thank you very much, Paula. And I mean, I don't want to reveal too much, but in the beginning of the novel, we see where people are sort of starstruck by the presence of one of the characters who, in ordinary terms, would be a celebrity. So the question that I have for you is, what is your assessment of how the novel addresses the issue of celebrity? And this is for anyone.
I'll jump in with that. Happy New Year, everybody, and it's good to be back. Yeah, the uh, probably one of the main characters, if not the main character, Owen, is the celebrity in question here, and uh, to say that this is a 22nd century setting, there are very much elements of 21st, 20th century celebrity in the personage of Owen. He's world renowned. Um, he's a heartthrob in many respects, um, and he also behind the scenes he's definitely different than he is when he's performing. I think the only difference is the whole aspect of virtual reality, and other areas like masking and that sort of thing. But I think celebrity in the 22nd century, at least according to Karen Lord and how she described Owen, but also Carissa, uh, is very similar to celebrity statuses of this century and the previous century.
I think
I
one
think
of the concerns that the novel highlights about celebrity is our tendency to give them God status. And you see Owen struggling with that um, because he is aware of his effect on people. He's aware that he's um, mega charismatic. And he is aware, he has a father wound, and he is very afraid of becoming his father, who was a megalomaniac. And you see him at times struggling with trying not to internalize the adoration that he gets from his fans.
I
there's
think
a
one of
lot
the
about
biggest.
Owen that brought Michael Jackson to mind. I don't know why, but this, if you remember, Michael Jackson almost had this sort of not of this world appeal. And if you looked at Michael Jackson's stage getup, in fact, I think he did try to sort of appear as somebody from another galaxy, you know. And I am wondering how much of that sort of appeal was Karen Lord tried to capture in the Owen character. I
I,
don't know. I just thought Michael Jackson just came to mind, and the fact that Michael, with his moonwalk dance and all that sort of extraterrestrial sort of connections. That's how I saw Owen instantly.
No, I similarly thought he was most like Michael Jackson. I think in the sense that Michael Jackson for us, or for the world, I suppose, was sort of the first kind of superstar that was bigger than any other. He was global. He crossed the color line. He was international in way. He did concerts in Africa. He was just so recognizable, so globally, and so kind of universally loved for the early part of his career. Certainly, I definitely also and he was. There were, like you say, he was something kind of almost out of this world, some sort of what the French call jamais vu. It's just he's never seen anything like this kind of level of stardom before, and that he kind of therefore occupied a particular sort of place as a person. As a result, I definitely think Owen captured that kind of ethereal kind of magnitude of it all. What I also thought was really interesting was that it reminded me the way that she drew on celebrity and that sort of response reminded me a lot actually of I don't know if you know the French footballer Lilian Thuram. And I've heard him speak because he's also branched into writing and philanthropy post in his post international football career, and um, and he's talked really eloquently and passionately and poignantly about the power that athletes have to enter people's lives. And when people follow a football team or an athlete, they have a certain power because they reach so many people just by doing whatever it is they do. They never meet the vast majority of the people that watch them week in, week out, year in, year out. And he argued that that's why athletes in particular are often told to be silent, because people recognize the power that they held if they were to speak, if they were to really say things that were important that were not being said, they would wield unfathomable power, or they could possibly wield unfathomable power. And I felt like Karen Lord actually was playing with that idea that I'd heard elsewhere. That actually, what if a celebrity really chose to use that power for real power with the Owen character? And I found that really, really compelling, actually.
And as you say that, Kessel, and Roger, not to advance this discussion too far ahead, but the novel, to me, I found it anyway, a lot to do about the use of power. Um,
Mm,
what if somebody who commanded that sort of attention at the trial, what 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 are they going to do with that power? How can that power be used? And I thought that the novel asked the reader to grapple with
mm.
um, that concept, that question. It was a sort of implicit question.
Yeah, it's just unusual because often when people have that sort of power in a novel, we're often thinking about the way that power corrupts, and that's not really her question. She's much more concerned with like, what if you used your power for good, or what if you used it just differently from how we've typically imagined someone with immense power to wield it, not for their own personal gain, but and not in any sort of what's the word, sort of maniacal vision. The way that Paul you described his father to megalomaniac. But what
Or
if
in a coercive way, a coercive way.
Yeah, just
Rather,
using and
mm,
just claiming your power, but on a
mm,
much grander scale than sometimes we use that kind of phrase.
And I think she did the same thing with two other characters who had lots of power, which is the owner of the VR company, Hendrix, and Carissa, who was also like a really super popular figure. She was an actress and a model, and yet they were using this power that they had along with Owen for good, so to speak. They were using it to improve and to help humankind, face what was about to happen. So yeah, I do think that she played with the idea of celebrity and power in an interesting way. Like people that you wouldn't expect to step
Mm.
up and say, yes, we're gonna help. I mean, they could have just easily been just there for their own personal profit, which they already, I mean, they had a lot of, personal advantages, and they could have just been happy to continue living that way. But I think the three of them who were the leaders of, the movement to how to, deal with the aliens, they were the ones that really stepped up and said, okay, this is what we're going to do. So that was
And
so
that
interesting.
is this in contrast to politicians, for example, who typically hold power? Is that the point that has been narrated? point that was being put across?
I think it is. It's about what is true leadership, right? That's the real question she's asking. What does it mean to be a leader, and who is a leader, and what makes a leader? I think a question is really at the center of the novel in lots of ways, even down to the people that are selected. I think, if I'm not giving too much away, to go to Havana, for example, that kind of 4 or 5 of them, how do they get selected, and why them? Why not other people? Um, I think it's always I think at the center of the novel in lots of ways are these questions of power and leadership, and how they interplay, and how when we think about them, we don't have to think about them. We can imagine, I think, good ways for them to kind of be useful, for the greater good, for mankind, this from a place of service, rather than self-aggrandizement.
I think in tandem with that, what I thought about the most with these figures and the whole concept of first contact and that sort of thing is a different, or at least an anti-colonial arc. That's about the only arc I saw in the novel, to be honest. But uh, I did see that this is almost a what if. What if what if the Spaniards would have treated indigenous people in a similar vein? What if the Portuguese would have done the same, or the French, or the English, or what have you? What if they would have done things differently? How different would our current world be? So I couldn't help but think about this historically, and also think through it from an anti-colonial framework, not a post-colonial framework. 'Cause I don't think she's elements of
Mm.
post-colonialism. Maybe small bits, but definitely anti-colonial. I don't know if anybody else thought it the same way.
That was how I read the entire book. Yeah, I mean, that's literally the main takeaway message for me. And what, while I was reading it, and even now in listening to you guys as well, I get the sense that you can't separate, even though it's science fiction, you get a glimpse into Karen Lord's politics. And I mean, it was Audre Lorde who said you can't separate a writer's politics from their writing. And even though this is science fiction, I got very clear the very clear impression that she was giving us a political message. This was anti-colonial writing, and she was showing us that even though these people occupy the corridors of power now, as in you're reading the book in 2024, 2023, and you realize, okay, I know who occupies the corridors of power. In the 22nd century, it's very different, but the world itself, or the global situation, although impacted by climate change, etc., it might not be necessarily different in terms of power structures and who wields the power, as Cassie was said. Because even going back to the issue of celebrity, I think she was kind of making a mockery of humans in the way we glorify
Mm.
celebrities, the way these people were, shouting "Owen, Owen." I mean, she was showing us that humans could be idiots sometimes, uh, to put it quite frankly. But I think she was making a very political and anti-colonial point in this novel. I saw you wanted to get in, Paula. I don't know if you want to comment on that.
No, I don't have any new nothing. I don't have anything new to say. I agree with everybody else's assessment. I read this novel as an anti-colonial novel. Um, even the way she characterizes the balance, she shows you that on Earth the balance of power in the 22nd century is shifting. For example, the global body responsible for agriculture moves from Rome to Accra. We see New York flooding. So she shows us, the balance of power is moving away from the centers that are controlling power in our lifetime.
Even with the catastrophic events that you relate to the countries like the Caribbean, Bangladesh, etc., when you mentioned the New York flooding scene, that's what came to mind. That this is not where you would typically relate or expect to have those sorts of catastrophic weather events. So I just want to sort of embellish that point, Paula. But
I actually
another
really
thing,
love that
Rosie,
part. I really love that when she was imagining a world where like Ethiopia and Nairobi were displacing Geneva and The Hague. And she imagined it so well, and you know how the African Union were really pleased about that, and they wouldn't let anyone forget it. You know,
mhm.
it's really I love the imagination, that other world kind of possibles part of the novel. Actually, just generally.
But on the tone of the politics as well, just to pick up on something that Rosie was mentioning, the other feature was the infiltration of these you know, people on Earth from the infiltrators. You didn't know who they were in there. And that just sort of reminded me of how the MI6 and the CIA go about their business in trying, in trying to achieve their agenda. So I thought that was also a parallel line, running with that sort of activity and these people from outer space.
And I think it was also a nod to how Europeans moved into the spaces that they eventually colonized. Because initially they moved in, they were doing trade with all these other countries, countries in Africa, countries in Asia. And initially, the relationship between Europeans and the people of these countries that they eventually colonized was respectful. Um, and then I think she's drawing a parallel that in she's showing the aliens infiltrating Earth. They're in positions of power, both in politically and in terms of the financial network of the planet. They're behaving like us, so that humans aren't even aware that these are not humans and that they have malicious intentions. And I think she was drawing a very clear parallel between how, showing us how the European colonizers, went about doing what they did.
I thought so too. And but what was the stark difference was the people who held the ultimate power. Um, so if you imagine these spies on the ground, up to malicious intentions, but yet um, the story does not connect like how the Europeans' stories connect, where the ultimate power holders do carry through on the agenda. In this instance, the people who held the ultimate power were not about colonizing; they were about something else. So that was kind of different.
But in a way, it also demonstrated what happens even today. We have certain friendly countries, finding themselves in Africa and Asia, in the name of restoring democracy and helping out and eradicating poverty when they have much more sinister intentions. I couldn't help, escaping that point, and it takes me back to the fact that Karen Lord was being deliberately political,
Yeah.
and you and that's why programs like Page Turners Plus is quite important, because even reading reviews online, a lot of people miss these points. Maybe there were points that Karen Lord didn't intend for us to get, and we're just being our typical selves. But I think they were important points. So I want to move on to a slightly, it's still political, but what is your impression of how the novel addresses gender? I don't know who wants to start with
I
it.
loved
Paula.
that. I loved, absolutely loved that. I loved the novel's assumption that there is gender parity in the 22nd century, that a woman is just as likely to be the leader of her planet or an industry as a man. It's just an assumption. She makes no distinct political statement. It's just the assumption. And I loved that. I love the fact that it was just the assumption. I also found she several in several places there was a nod to gender fluidity. Um, General An, for example, I perceived them as gender fluid. Um, when I initially read it, I thought Tarek was gender fluid, and then later I realized no, that wasn't the intention with Tarek. Um, I think there were other characters who were the pronoun them or their was used instead of him or her, but right now I can't remember who. But I really liked how she dealt with gender.
Yeah, and also related gender and sexuality, like Kanoa, uh, definitely was attracted to men, and there was nothing in the text, nothing in the tone of the text, nothing with the people surrounding him that it seemed odd or that he was aberrant in any way. So there's another instance of gender sexuality that seems to have advanced from where we are right now.
Yeah, I remember the general on and the they them pronoun. It was really nice to read. I realized on the reading that I don't think I'd ever read a novel with a non-binary main character who was or someone using those pronouns. And it felt sometimes at first it was like, oh, why what? And but then you got used to it and you're like, oh, okay, that's their pronouns, and you roll with it. And it like you say, Eric, there was nothing unusual. No one else seems to remark on it. It's just you as a reader kind of going, this is a him and this is a her and this is a them. Okay. And then we go. I really liked as well that, like you say, that person was in a position of power. So there was no question of them being sort of ostracized or marginalized or invaluable to the community or the society that they were part of. They were very serious and very important, and you rocked with them because that's you needed them. I think that's a really important way to include the character as well.
And in terms of the tone, just an extension of the gender question, I also didn't get a sense of any class stratification. Maybe it was there. It certainly was there in terms of seniority in the organizations, but I didn't read that as class stratification. And
They
I didn't
no,
get,
but the
yeah,
the
I
the
didn't
the
get a
class
sense. Let me just,
war no
yeah,
the
right.
class war is definitely hasn't been solved. The class
Yeah,
war is
yours does.
definitely still exists. Remember how the other delegates, student delegates,
Mm.
responded to Bay because
Mhm.
Bay was
They was
wealthy, and
from
they
Rich People
yes,
Planet.
Yeah, rich people
Right.
planet.
right,
Yes. Yes.
right.
Yes.
So
Yes. There was.
the class war is still ongoing.
Yeah,
Mm.
there was definitely that rich people planet thing. But just to continue though, I accept that. Just to continue to, there was an absence of color, race. I didn't see that
No,
in a stark
it
way.
wasn't absent. It wasn't absent. It just wasn't an issue, I think. I mean, she was talking about, she did mention people's skin colors, but there wasn't,
Yeah,
race
but
was
not in
there. Racism
not
was
not
not.
you're right.
If
Well,
you see
race.
the difference, race was there.
That's basically
Racism
what
was
I
not.
meant. That's what I meant. I mean,
Right,
I didn't see racism to it.
Well, was
That's
it
what I
was
meant.
it
right,
ethnicity or was it race? Because I don't.
right.
I would
Also,
agree with Tony. I didn't see any racism, but I did see ethnicity, and also we can maybe say fluid ethnicity. Like Carissa was described
as
as
right.
being.
Mhm.
She came from the continent of Africa, but also had heritage, I think, from Asia. And I mean, we don't know what I didn't gather what Owen was in terms of ethnicity or anything like that. So um, it was there, but it was really really understated, and at least in my reading of it. Um, that surprised me. I was because I was expecting maybe some Afrofuturism, and the teeny tiny bits of that, but that's not the driving part of this novel at all.
She no, I think she was very deliberately multicultural. Um, she Kanoa, for example, is a major character. He's from the Pacific, if I recall correctly. Um, I agree with you that we didn't get a glimpse, we didn't get any indication at all of what Owen looked like. In my mind, he was a Rasta man. Um, but I mean, I'm of course I'm reading it from my world. So yeah.
They're just smoking all that weed in the beginning of
I
the.
think that's what it is. I think this
I
it's
don't think it's a ganja. I don't think it was a ganja. I remember there was a description of Owen shifting a lock, and I thought of dreadlocks. No, it could be just a lock of hair, but I
Didn't
yeah.
he? Didn't his uncle say that he came from a place where his people meditated? Like they were kind of. I got the impression that he was kind of Buddhist, or from that tradition. So I assumed kind of Asian. Sorry, everyone. Um,
No, but he's not. But
but he's not
Owen is
Earthling,
not
so
human, right?
yeah.
He's not human. So
But could it be that
Yes,
Karen
he's
Lord? Oh,
human.
oh,
He's
go ahead.
human. He's
no,
human.
he's
He's
descended from
no,
humans.
he's human. He's not an earthling. She made a distinction. She referred to a lot of the aliens
From the
as
diaspora.
being
Yes,
human.
but
Humanoid.
They were not from
humanoid,
Earth,
not
but they were
human.
human. No, no,
Humanoid.
she definitely used the word humans to
Yes, I
refer to
remember
them.
seeing the word human once
Mm,
describing Owen once, and in other areas of the novel, he was described as a member of the human diaspora, and then there was also mention, or of the diaspora of Earth, I should say, and there was also mention of marriage or marriages between um, humans and non-humans, creating other like hybrids. So I did not get the impression that Owen was human. I thought he was part human.
But that's interesting though, and this go back to the whole process of colonialism when you had Spanish men, Portuguese men, British men, French men cohabiting,
Don't
or
forget the Dutch.
the Dutch cohabiting, raping both indigenous and African women. All these different terms come out: mulatto, mestizo, castizo, so forth and so on. And the powers that be are creating these different categories of people. And what's interesting about the term mulatto is that it was though that a mulatto was a standalone because it comes from mule, and mules are hybrid animals and they can't reproduce other mules. you know so I think I don't know. I mean, I think she might be playing with this concept, but it's so normalized in the text that I think it does cause us to think deeper about the implications of colonialism and how we got to where we are right now in the early 21st century. And what do we call ourselves? Why do we call ourselves what we call ourselves? Why am I Black or African American or African descendant? We have all these terms that sometimes just confuse people, especially white folks. They're confused. I thought you were Black. Now you're African American. I mean, it's so I mean, so I think she's poking at this um, in categories of ethnicity that, let's say, for African descendant people in this hemisphere, that we didn't create ourselves, but we've been bucking against it since time immemorial.
So was it an attempt to show that 21st century humans are just famous for nitpicking, whereas in the 22nd century they have bigger issues to deal. I mean, we have bigger issues to deal with in the 21st century compared to nitpicking about race, ethnicity, and all the other pedantic things that we focus
I
on.
think she was just saying that we've worked through that. I think it was so that it was not. So she deals with gender in a way that makes it's not a big deal. She deals with ethnicity in that way as well. I think she's just suggesting that by the late 22nd century, because it's late 22nd century when we meet them, we've worked through it. So, those are no longer issues that occupy a lot of our time, or any of it, in fact.
And it's a hopeful vision, isn't it? It's the idea that actually these liberation fights that we've been struggling with for some years, centuries even, um, they can be resolved. With the political will to find justice in our world, we can have it. Right? That's what she's essentially saying.
But maybe not resolved by humans, and I think that's probably the theme, another theme of the book, that yes, we're dealing with resolutions, but they're being solved by a greater intelligence that does not manifest itself in the humankind, and maybe variations of the human.
I don't know that. I don't know. Remember when Kanoa is confronted with this, the narrative that aliens come in and solve the problems of humanity, and he rails against it. He really resents it, because he's saying this is the same narrative that Europeans put forward
Yeah,
when they found
the white savior.
amazing things in African civilization. They said it's aliens who came and did it. So I don't know that she is saying that humans can't solve our problems by ourselves.
So does she nod towards the collective rather than the individual?
Right, I think it's the
Yeah.
collective. I think that
And
is the. Yeah, go ahead.
I want to throw a different view on the book that you guys are all talking about. It's the 22nd century and it's in the future and we have solved and we have solved. But of course, this is speculative fiction or whatever you want to call it. So obviously, it's not real. I'm wondering if Karen Lord isn't using this the way that she writes, using science fiction and speculative fiction to get us to start thinking about what is actually happening in the world today and what we are going to do about it. Not wait for it to be resolved in 22/7. If we take out the futuristic aspects of the book and look at the themes that she's dealing with, I feel like she's trying to tell us that we need to look at these themes in our present day and how are we gonna handle it. That's what I wanted to throw.
And I don't think any of us had a different perspective, though.
But
Yeah, I definitely read
interestingly,
it that way.
I mean, even like if I were in a literature exam right now and writing my answers to this book, I'd say that she was trying to tell us that maybe the aliens are among us, and the aliens would refer to people who have independence of thought and the will to think differently to the 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 rest of the collective. I don't know what you guys think about that in terms of
Right,
us
it's
looking at it
possible
from
because yes, there were bad aliens had infiltrated, but also there were good aliens on Earth working to help. So maybe, yeah, that's what she's saying, that the people that we look at as otherworldly and alien and weird and strange and like, oh my goodness, how odd are they? Maybe they're the ones who are helping us to see things differently and find solutions.
Can I ask a question, if I may? Um, I think one of the things that surprised me is I felt like the Caribbean wasn't central to the novel. Did anybody else feel that like there was a Caribbeanness was absent or was present? Like, do you think she? Because it obviously doesn't. It's obviously not completely absent because Havana is so central to the plot storyline, and that's also a choice, right? To center Havana in that way. So what did other people? How did other people take that? Like, how did you have the Caribbean in the back of your mind as you were reading and wondering what she was saying about the future of the Caribbean or the Caribbean in the future? Or...
I
No,
didn't
I
even
mean,
give it a thought.
notice
I
it's
just thought
not
it was the world
right.
that she was
A
referring to.
typical
I never even thought
Caribbean
of.
novel, right?
Right. Yeah, I thought she was doing something global and of the other galaxies, right?
Right.
I didn't see the space either, Kesawa, for that sort of focus. I didn't see it through the, you know.
And also the novel's insistence on human beings working as a collective would be completely contrary to if she were to have this as a Caribbean centered novel. I don't think that's her intention. I think she intended to be global, and I don't see why she can't be.
Kesua, is it that you thought Caribbean author she must make this focused on the Caribbean? Because honestly, the book was perfectly fine not being Caribbean centric. I don't know what you.
Yeah, no, I don't necessarily think. I think you're right that she's clearly got a very global, international, intergalactic vision, and so I'm not suggesting that the Caribbean should be the center of the New World Order, though I may personally think it. I think it's more that I think I was surprised by what felt like, there wasn't perhaps maybe in the writing, maybe in the speech, maybe I don't know. I kind of I think I was surprised. I thought, oh my god, it's going to be Caribbean science fiction. I thought I'd see something maybe of the Caribbean more than I did. I don't know that it was to be global, it had to be absent the Caribbean, if that makes sense. But at the same time, it wasn't because, like I said, Havana was there, and you know. So I'm just curious if anybody else read it like that, kind of wondering how the Caribbean fit into her vision for the future. But I also wondered, sorry, just to carry on a bit, I also thought, is it something to do with the way that climate change might impact the Caribbean? That in 150 years' time, the Caribbean as we know it will nowhere near exist in the way that we think anyway. And so it doesn't make sense to project it in that way.
No, I didn't see any direct thread leading to that sort of thinking. What what I want to go back on, Kesso, and maybe in sort of tacit support of, of what you're saying, right? She did spend a lot of time with a European focus, right? In terms of where were we on Earth? Well, we were in Europe, pretty much, for a fairly sizable part of the novel, you know. So I'm just trying to think if you wanted that flipped, and instead of setting the tone and the setting in Prague and France, you know, Paris, were you expecting it to be maybe Caribbean? Would that have
Yeah, I
made a
think
difference?
I don't know if it would have made a difference. I found it's kind of interesting because it wasn't in London and Paris, right? It was in Prague and Amsterdam and these kind of not quite, it's not Slovenia, but it's bits of Europe that you don't see all the time when you think Europe, right? But similarly, and also she then sends the characters to Havana is kind of a suggestion that the future is happening somewhere else as well, and that's very much throughout the novel something that a thread that she's kind of tugging at constantly. I guess I think it was a question. I felt like, oh, I would have liked to see what Grenada looks like in 150 years time, or is anyone thinking about it, or what's going on there, or is there a character from around there? But that's my personal interest, and
Well,
I get it. She
there's
doesn't have to do that. I was just like, is that going to happen? Are we going to
there's your
see?
book, Kesua. Write it. Gotta write the books you want to see.
Toni Morrison
I
said,
also feel like, yeah, Tori Morrison said that. I also feel like, yeah, it was in Europe, but it was a very different Europe, right? It wasn't like
It was
she
a
wasn't
crumbling
like
Europe as well, so it
right.
wasn't
She
like a
wasn't
Europe you
like
want to go to.
glorifying the Eiffel Tower or anything like that. Like it was Europe, but it was
It
Yeah.
not
was Europe as I
Europe
imagine it in 150
not
years. I was
Europe
like, I can
today.
totally see it like
Right.
that, like
What
the
what
end
what
of
I
the
found
empire.
what I find interesting is that in like Amsterdam there would be they were trying to preserve the old way, but it was virtual. So, and the same thing with Havana too. Um, that was interesting that there's this contrast of what it was and what it is in the late 22nd century and what it was maybe in its heyday. And I know the characters that were brought to Havana complained about the architecture, which I thought was, I don't know, maybe was a jab at um, communism. I don't know, but you know, I've never been to Havana, but what I've seen of
Lovely
Havana,
place, Eric. Strong recommend.
yes, Havana looks very much like my hometown. in terms of the old part of the city. So I'm down with that type of. I mean, it's familiar to me. Let me put it that way. But they did complain about it because they thought they were going to party in Havana. So there was this sense, Kasua, that possibly the view of people like Kanoa and Ursa and the other fellow who was from Quebec, and they thought that maybe Havana or representing the Caribbean was like Party Central, which is a 21st century, 20th century view of the Caribbean. I'm just throwing that out
Eric,
there.
might that not be because they were young people and wherever they went, they would think they should be partying? I mean, I'm just throwing that in there.
Thank you, Auntie P.
But in terms,
Roger, yeah.
yes,
No, I just looked at the counter here and I realized we're running out of time. So I wanted to get in this virtual reality theme, which was a very strong part of the narrative. And I don't know if anybody else sort of had the same struggles. Struggles perhaps the wrong word, but sometimes I didn't know where I was in the novel, whether I was in virtual reality, in a setting of virtual reality, or was this actually happening physically, right? And I felt that, that was so intentional in terms of projecting what life will be like in the 22nd century and beyond. So we are in some virtual space here now. I mean, I can see Paula, but I can't touch her, and we're having this animated conversation. But this is like baby steps compared to where she really takes us with the virtual reality. And I like that part of the novel as well.
but
I I was really astonished.
mm,
I really enjoyed the way that she painted that picture for us by when they have to play a game of football, and then like, are we learning football theory? Are we gonna find out, the principles of football? That no, you're gonna just play football, like what on a football field, like with a ball. Like she kind of brings to life this idea that like they're so entwined in this virtual world that the concept of actually doing something for real in the way that we describe it is almost alien to them. And I think that's, yeah, the
It-
opposite of the virtue. It
right.
it, it kind of draws a picture for
It's a
us.
I think it's a criticism of where she thinks the world is headed. Uh, that we are going to be literally out of touch with each other, and how is that
Mm,
going to affect our relationships with one
mm,
another. So actually, it kind of spoils something about what we talked about before, about racism being no more. Wow, well, is racism going to be no more or less of an issue because we're not actually physically interacting with one another? I don't know. So I
mm.
think there might be a little
That, that
a glitch in this text.
I would like to think not, but I also think that she was trying to point out the time when, well, or I should say the lecturer's insistence that they do this in real, and the fact that there were certain times when they had to be there in raw, that she was trying to point out through the characters that, we cannot lose the physical, the physical things that connect us. The fact that even though, yes, we can meet virtually, but it's still important every so often to physically be with people. And this is actually something that researchers have known for a while. I remember when I was studying an IT course sometime back, one of the things they talked about was that they saw that in groups that worked remotely, even though everything started, the relationship started off well, eventually people started mistrusting each other because they had never actually met in person. And so they always try to build in person meetings when you have groups that work virtually, because if you don't actually know the person, then you will mistrust them. That's why we all need to really meet soon.
So I need to know what the drunk version of Francine is so I can rate it. Right?
But in a way, she was showing us that as Eric said, it was a sort of glitch because we're heading towards, on one hand, utopia and then dystopia because you have young people in the 21st century heading to concerts and they videotape the entire thing so that they could go home and watch it when they had it right in front of them at that point in time. So it's a sort of dystopia that we're heading towards. But in terms of the creation of the global government and forming global law, it's a utopia. So I think she was giving us options. We could go along that path or the other path, and it's a message toward for us to work on. Unfortunately, though, I think we've had a lovely discussion here, but we're out of time. So the next time the viewers see us, we will be interviewing Karen Lord so that we could find out more about her reason, her concept behind this novel, because it's given us quite a lot to discuss. So until then, thank you for joining us and have a lovely day.